This happens with men too. A lot of men feel like they might be being discriminated against. Again, we can go back to the Mad Max bullshit controversy where men felt like, oh my god, they're curtailing for Furiosa. This should be Furiosa Max, not Mad Max. This is not a Mad Max movie. And the Mad Max hardly said anything. His dialogue was cut short. This is sexist against men. It was such a ridiculous argument to make when you look at the circumstances. Mad Max never had a lot of dialogue in his movies. He grunted. Most of the people talk way more than him than all of his fucking movies. Go watch the Mad Max movies if you don't believe me. There's plenty of examples of men crying wolf too. Okay, so that's members of a group might not want to speak out because then if you say like, hey, that's kind of bullshit. The Markiplier meme of the guy that raises his hand and opposes and he's thrown out the window. That's exactly this. People are afraid to say something because they'll then be ostracized and be branded as a horrible person, and they'll be slandered, and their name will be torn to the mud. So that's the problem. There is a problem. That's why there's a problem. And so then the suppression of those opposing viewpoints from the other side or within members of your own community. That creates this illusion of unanimity, and then so all those things combined together create mind guards. So that's what a mind guard is. It's a very long-winded explanation of what a mind guard is. You are is Hobrium. Yeah, Hobrium. I can't pronounce that damn word. I know, and that is the focus. That is the focus on personal attacks rather than the content of the intellect being debated. So people, rather than debating my intellect, rather than debating me on my argument, people will focus like on a characteristic of my face, or let's just say I had a poster of a woman behind me in a bathing suit or something. That's sexism. See, you just promote the same sexism. You're curtailing. You promote that same sexist, espouse those same sexist ties, and you claim to be objective. Oh, you're not objective because you like women. Well, you know what? Everybody can only be subjective to a certain degree. Now we have to give everybody a certain amount of leeway, a certain amount of benefit of the doubt, if you will, when we hear opinion pieces. Again, this is opinion pieces. You have to give the person a little bit of a leeway and benefit of the doubt, like I said, because of the fact that they do have their own biases. And I'm very transparent about that, I feel like. Other people might not be as transparent about that. Other people might not be willing to talk about that. Again, I have said, why have I noticed that the hip sway in women is probably exaggerated in games a little bit more? I spend a lot of time looking at women walk by me. I look at their butts. Yes, I objectify them. I like looking at women's butts. I enjoy it. I find it very appeasing. I find a butt on a woman a very nice thing to look at. I think it's fun. I find it beautiful. I think the female form is probably the most beautiful thing I've ever beheld in my entire life. And I fall into that the stereotyping of men worshiping the female form that we talked about, like in the Magic Mike example that I shared with you guys earlier, talking about worshiping the female, exalting them, putting them on a pedestal to a degree, and that's an example of that and how that comes to fruition. Okay, so you could say that I have a very biased sexist opinion because of the fact that I'm a red-blooded, straight American male, white American male with male privilege, and I victimize women by looking at them objectively because I see them as a sexual being. And then I will, of course, I'm going to refute that argument made against me, and just in a second here. So now that the last thing I wanted to talk about, the last thing that this is going to close out identity politics. Okay, the reason why identity politics suck dick and why nobody should buy into this bullshit of identity politics is they focus on the negative and they don't focus on any of the positive. As we have seen, there are tons of examples, like just a wealth of information of examples of female and both male-female characters being portrayed in a positive light. They both there's examples of men and females being they're not objectified. They're powerful characters. They have their own desires once, and they become their own characters and their own storylines. I listed a huge list of people, and I don't think we really need to go through that list again. but that you had these arguments, some people making arguments that somehow that they just focus on all like the negative. So they say that Princess Peach is a misinterpretation of women, and she is a horrible. She is a horrible representation of women. She falls into this damsel in distress trope, and that promotes these negative stereotypes pertaining towards women. I roached another YouTuber who provided an amazing insight, and I don't have her. I ran out of time during this part that I was writing, and I didn't get to it. Her name is Kite Tails. I highly recommend everybody checking out this video by Kite Tails. I can share the video with you, however. Let me show you this video. In this video, she talks about the damsel in distress trope. Here's the video right here, and this is done by Kite Tails. She's another female, and she talks about her interpretation of these same characters that Anita Sarkeesian found to be weak examples of female characters in games. Like, well, these women were only objects to be acted upon. They weren't protagonists in their own right, and they were depowered or whatever. And I would highly suggest you all to look at that. Now, this is her perception, and she does such a good job of objectively looking at this issue that Anita Sarkeesian pointed out. Again, these opinions that refute these other hardlining feministic stance are not that it does not for the purpose of disparaging the fact that there are examples of sexism in the media. Again, I can't say that too much because it sounds like I'm knocking Anita Sarkeesian, and I'm not trying to. I'm merely saying some of the examples that she has provided are common in the media, and she did a good job of pointing out some of these examples. But again, I think those examples were cherry picked. And again, I cherry picked examples that refuted that claim. I said, well, if you can pick examples of female characters that have been depowered or whatever and misrepresented and fall into traditional gender roles, I will pick characters that do not fall into those traditional gender roles. So you have these opinions going like this, and each person cherry picking arguments. And I was forced to cherry pick to look at this argument critically, to shine a light on the fact that no, this is not really necessarily a sexist thing. It's just it's a convenient plot device that's often used to stir a character and a protagonist to action. Now, you can say, you can argue that it is depowering toward women, they fall into that stereotypes, but like I said, that's a very negative way of seeing that. And Kite Tails does an excellent job of portraying these characters in a positive light. Characters like Princess Peach and Princess Zelda. She talks about these characters and why they are powerful female characters in their own right. And I would argue that women reserve the right to be princesses and to be dainty, ditzy princesses if that's what they want to do. If that's what they're into, let them do it. There's nothing wrong with women wanting to do that. And I think to say that that's not a real woman is just as sexist as a man like supposedly, allegedly suppressing a woman. So I think that we need to look at those issues very critically. And that is an example of people focusing on the negative qualities of what happens here on the internet, what happens there in video games, without looking at all the positive aspects of all these other positive characters that have existed. And it sucks. And it sucks because we actually have to have this conversation to a degree. Just do what you want. Yes, ordinary. That's exactly it. That's exactly it. So I am like, oof. You watched that video before, but only for a bit. I would encourage you to watch the whole video because it is a great video. Okay, so we're almost done. We're gonna talk about sexuality now. Okay, so we keep coming back to this theme of sexuality, and women are often made to feel uncomfortable because of their sexuality. They don't feel like they can express it without being victimized. They don't feel like they can rock it or own it without being labeled a slut or a whore or something like that. And again, several arguments. There are popular arguments that saying, being the expression of sexuality is damaging and it's weakening a woman's power. That is not the case at all. As we have seen in these examples, there is very real power in human sexuality. We are all sexual beings, and to discount the power that sex plays and the dynamics of our relationships is very, very ignorant. That it is people that don't understand how relationships works. They've never bothered to study anything, or they've probably never even been in a relationship to begin with. If you've ever been anybody who's been sexually active. Sorry, I know a lot of people don't like that term. Sexually active in a relationship should know that there are certain power dynamics that are displayed in the expression of sexuality. Now, the expression of the sexuality, meaning the acceptance of your sexuality, that you're a sexual being, and the actual participation in the sexual acts, is an expression of power. You are inviting an individual to participate with you in a very intimate setting, and you are making yourself vulnerable and sharing intimacy on a new level. Now, we are all sharing intimacy here on some level because we're sharing ideas and truths, and we're disclosing personal information with each other. We might share a personal story, like, oh, this one time this happened and that made me feel this way. So that's an expression of intimacy. Now, intimacy in the physical sense of sex, that is an expression of power, and so is withholding it. Okay, withholding sexuality is an expression of power. If you don't believe that, if you've ever seen somebody give you the silent treatment, or if you're a husband or a wife, or you're speaking from personal experience, I can say the withholding of that sexual action is a power dynamic that happens in relationships, and women just as easily as men can use that. They can give you the stony cold shoulder and withhold. Now, we talked about how men are supposedly the key masters, and then women are the gatekeepers. So men have the key to unlock the gate. So we are supposed to be aggressive and aggressively and confidently walk forth towards a woman and take her in our arms and just throw her up against the wall and just ravage her body. And a woman is supposed to dictate how far she lets that go. And depending on how far that she lets that go, ironically enough, she is either considered, and oftentimes, not all the times, not every setting, oftentimes she's considered a slut or a whore if she goes too far, or a prude and a tease if she doesn't go, or she goes too far and she's a slut and a whore. If she doesn't go far enough, she's a prude and a tease. Like, there's no winning. That is an example of sex playing a really very real power dynamic in the way we fundamentally relate to as humans, and on a thinking, a cognitive level, and a behavioral level, you guys. Okay, now, that is an example also of sexism, you could say, portrayed of a negative light, of women portrayed in a negative light. They're whores if they want to have sex and they have multiple partners, and it's devalued, like, oh, I want a virgin, or a woman that's not had as many sexual partners, because men don't like feeling emasculated. That emasculates a man, because a real man is supposed to get around. He's supposed to have more sexual partners. He's supposed to spread his seed across the universe, because that is what's expected of a man. And unfortunately, those are exaggerated stereotypes that perpetuate society today, to where if a man feels like he's less experienced, he was more likely, in some cases, not all the time, in some cases, men might feel emasculated, and that could be an example of sexism, or traditional gender roles playing out in our behavior. Is it perpetuated by society? Is it malicious? Maybe sometimes it is. Maybe people are angry because they haven't had that opportunity to share that intimacy with another human being. Therefore, they lash out and they will call a person a tease or a slut based on their experiences with that individual. If a woman wants to have multiple sex partners and she chooses to casually date them, and be like, no, dude, I'm not interested in you. I just wanted to bone you. all of a sudden it's like, whoa, 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 dude, whoa.